Ethan Blackwood sneered with contempt in the theatre's dressing room. "Sing if you can," he scoffed upon seeing the 67-year-old nun walk onto the stage. Sister Grace clutched the microphone with trembling hands, but her eyes shone with determination. What emerged from her lips froze the sneer on his face forever. Sister Grace Miller adjusted the chairs of the small theatre attached to St. Clare's orphanage for the 10th time that morning. At 67, her grey hairs escaped discreetly from beneath her white veil, and her hands, calloused from tireless work, trembled slightly as she organized every detail of the benefit performance scheduled for that evening. The event had been planned for months with the goal of raising funds for urgent repairs to the orphanage's roof, which leaked every time it rained heavily on the 45 children residing there. Throughout her religious life, Sister Grace had dedicated every minute of her days to caring for the abandoned children who arrived at the orphanage. She knew every story of suffering, every tear shed, and every smile earned with much love and patience. The walls of that place held decades of her devotion, from her early years as a young novice full of dreams and uncertainties to the present day, when her experience had made her a respected maternal figure throughout the local community. That special afternoon, various local artists were preparing to take the makeshift stage that had been set up with borrowed lumber and sound equipment donated by regional merchants. There were folk dance groups, a guitar quartet, some poets who would recite their works, and even a small orchestra formed by students from the Community Music Conservatory. All had volunteered to help the orphanage's cause, touched by Sister Grace's tireless dedication and the urgency of the institution's financial situation. What no one knew, not even the other nuns of the congregation, was that Sister Grace was also signed up to perform that night. For weeks, she had been rehearsing in secret in the orphanage's small chapel, always in the early hours of the morning, when she was sure all the children were sound asleep. Her voice echoed between the ancient walls of the chapel like a melodic prayer, imbued with a technique that seemed to come from far away, from a time she rarely allowed her mind to visit. As she tested the microphone one last time before the guests arrived, Sister Grace felt a familiar tightness in her chest. It wasn't stage fright, as she had spent decades speaking in public during masses and community events. It was something much deeper, a mix of nostalgia and regret that always visited her when music became more intensely present in her life. Her experienced hands adjusted the microphone stand's height with the precision of someone who had made that movement thousands of times in a previous life. The first people began to arrive as the sun still painted the sky with orange hues. They were neighborhood residents, local merchants, some families who had adopted children from the orphanage over the years, and various volunteers who regularly helped with the institution's activities. The atmosphere was imbued with positive, supportive energy, all united by the same purpose of helping those children who so desperately needed a decent and safe home. Sister Grace observed the backstage commotion, assisting the other artists with technical issues and offering words of encouragement to those who showed nervousness. Her calming presence and maternal smile had the power to soothe even the most agitated hearts. No one could imagine that, behind that apparent serenity, resided an artist who had renounced a brilliant future on stage to dedicate her life to serving those most in need. The theater slowly began to fill, and anticipation took over the atmosphere. The orphanage children occupied the front rows, their little faces illuminated by the prospect of a special night. Sister Grace smiled to see them so excited and felt that all her dedication over the years had been worth every second of personal sacrifice. 45 years ago, in a small town in rural Tennessee, a young woman named Grace Miller was walking home after another day of work at the local textile factory. At 22, she carried on her shoulders not only the responsibility of supporting her widowed and ailing mother, but also a vocal talent that seemed to transcend the limitations of her social condition. Every evening after the simple supper she prepared with the few resources they had, Grace would sing to lull her mother to sleep. Her mother suffered from a pulmonary illness that left her increasingly frail and dependent. It was during a performance at the town's county fair that her voice caught the attention of David Carter, a music producer from New York City who was visiting relatives in the area. He had witnessed many auditions throughout his career, discovered various talents who later became big names in American music, but he had never heard a voice with such purity and natural emotion. The way Grace interpreted popular songs seemed to touch the soul of everyone present in the town square, transforming a simple community performance into an almost sacred moment of human connection. David sought her out the next day, finding her at the factory gate at the end of her shift. He explained that he worked with the biggest names in national music and would like to take her to New York City, where she could record an album and start a professional career that would certainly lead her to stardom. The proposal included a generous contract, a house for her to live in the city, and even medical assistance for her mother, who could be treated in the country's best hospitals. For 2 weeks, Grace experienced the most intense conflict of her life. Her nights were filled with dreams where she saw herself singing on the biggest stages in the United States, her voice being heard by millions of people through radio and television. She imagined what it would be like to have enough financial resources to provide her mother with all the necessary medical care, and how rewarding it would be to use her talent to bring joy and emotion to so many people who, like her, faced daily difficulties. However, as the days passed and her mother's condition visibly deteriorated, Grace began to understand that her presence was more important than any artistic career she could build. Her mother had sacrificed everything for her since her father's early passing, working in precarious conditions to ensure her daughter had at least the basics to survive. How could she abandon her precisely when she most needed care and affection? On the morning David was to return to New York City, Grace met him at the city's bus station, with tears in her eyes and a definitive decision in her heart. She said she could not accept the offer, as her mother needed her more than the world needed her music. David tried to argue, offering even better conditions and assuring her that her mother would receive the best medical care possible, but Grace had already made her decision, and nothing could make her change her mind. For the next 3 years, Grace cared for her mother with a devotion that impressed the entire neighborhood. She sang to her every night, transforming each song into a prayer of love and gratitude. When her mother finally passed, leaving an immense void in her heart, Grace felt she had fulfilled her greatest purpose on earth. It was in that moment of deep reflection on the meaning of life that she decided to enter religious life, carrying with her the certainty that her musical talent could be used to serve God and those most in need. Time had passed, but her voice remained preserved like a treasure hidden deep in her soul. Even after decades dedicated entirely to work at the orphanage, Grace still felt music pulsating in her veins whenever she allowed herself to remember that distant time of her youth when the whole world seemed to be within her grasp. The commotion at the orphanage theater took on a new dimension when 3 luxury cars parked in front of the main gate. From the first vehicle stepped a tall man, wearing an impeccably tailored suit, expensive sunglasses, and a posture that exuded superiority with every step. It was Ethan Blackwood, one of the country's most famous singers, known as much for his musical successes as for his controversial personality and provocative statements in the press. Ethan had been invited to the benefit event through his publicist, who considered his participation a good marketing opportunity to improve his public image, which had been tarnished by some recent scandals involving conflicts with other artists and arrogant statements about independent musicians. His manager had insisted that an appearance at a charity event would be perfect to demonstrate his humanitarian side, especially considering that the Artist of the Year award elections were approaching. Accompanied by his security team and assistants, Ethan entered the theater with an air of someone doing a huge favor for those simple people. He greeted a few local dignitaries who had attended the event with quick handshakes and forced smiles, clearly demonstrating that he would rather be anywhere else in the world at that moment. His first words were complaints about the quality of the sound and lighting, comparing the venue to the professional studios where he was accustomed to performing. When Sister Grace approached to greet him and thank him for his presence, Ethan barely looked up from his cell phone, offering only a distracted nod, while commenting to his manager about how events of this type were a waste of time but necessary to maintain his public image. He observed the modest theater with a critical and disdainful look, making sarcastic comments about the simple decor in the audience, which consisted mainly of working-class people. Ethan's manager had promised the organizers that the singer would give a special performance, But when it came time to discuss the technical details, Ethan showed extreme impatience with any aspect that did not meet his demanding standards. He criticized the repertoire of the other artists who would perform, referring to them as amateurs who knew nothing about real music, and questioned the organization about why there were so many local artists at the event, when his presence alone would be enough to attract the audience. During the minutes leading up to the start of the performances, Ethan remained isolated in the makeshift dressing room, refusing to interact with the other artists and openly displaying his contempt for the event's simplicity. He called some famous friends, speaking loudly about how he was wasting his time at a second-rate event, without caring that his voice was being heard by volunteers and organizers who worked tirelessly for the success of the night. His arrogance reached its peak when he learned that an elderly nun was also on the night's performance list. Ethan let out a sarcastic laugh and commented to his team that it would probably be an embarrassing performance of off-key religious hymns, something that would certainly make the audience uncomfortable and compromise the artistic quality of the event. He suggested that the organization remove the nun from the program so as not to jeopardize his own performance. Ethan's behavior contrasted dramatically with the atmosphere of solidarity and love that permeated the entire event. While families embraced emotionally, seeing the collective effort to help the orphanage children, while local artists prepared nervously but happily to contribute their talents. And while volunteers scurried about ensuring everything ran perfectly, Ethan remained in his bubble of superiority, oblivious to the true meaning of that special night. His presence at the venue seemed more like a commercial obligation than a genuine desire to contribute to a noble cause, and his disdainful attitude began to bother even some of the most distinguished guests who had attended the event, creating a palpable tension in an atmosphere that had previously breathed only harmony and common purpose. The most awkward moment of the night arrived when Sister Grace was announced to take the stage. Ethan, who was casually chatting with some local journalists about his upcoming musical projects, abruptly interrupted the conversation upon hearing the nun's name called by the presenter. An expression of incredulity and malicious amusement took over his face when he saw the frail figure of the 67-year-old nun timidly walking towards the center of the stage. Without any shame or consideration for others' feelings, Ethan began to make sarcastic comments loudly, purposely directed so that the entire audience could hear him clearly. He said that benefit events always attracted people who confused goodwill with artistic talent, and that they would probably witness a few embarrassing minutes of an amateur performance that would make everyone uncomfortable. His cutting words echoed through the silent theater, creating an atmosphere of tension and unease among those present. When Sister Grace finally reached the microphone, her hands trembled visibly, and she needed a few seconds to position herself properly. Ethan took advantage of this natural hesitation to intensify his public humiliation campaign, commenting that elderly people should recognize their limitations and leave music to those who truly understood the subject. He suggested that the nun should be content to pray for true artists instead of trying to compete with them on stage. The climax of the humiliation came when Ethan rose from his seat and, addressing Sister Grace directly with a cruel smile on his lips, said loudly for the entire audience to hear that she could sing if she could, but that she shouldn't feel bad when she realized she was completely out of her element. He added that music was a serious art that required years of technical study and professional experience, things an elderly nun obviously did not possess. The audience remained in absolute silence, torn between embarrassment at Ethan's attitude and compassion for the humiliating situation Sister Grace was facing. Many of those present knew of the nun's tireless work at the orphanage and were indignant at the famous singer's lack of respect. But the difference in social status and the intimidation created by Ethan's presence left them without an immediate reaction. Sister Grace absorbed every cruel word with a serenity that impressed everyone present. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not allow any of them to fall publicly. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, as if offering a silent prayer, and when she opened them again, there was a determination in them that no one expected to see. She adjusted the microphone with hands that no longer trembled and looked directly at Ethan with a dignity that contrasted sharply with his arrogance. The entire theater remained in suspense, waiting to see how that awkward situation would resolve itself. Some people in the audience began to whisper among themselves, expressing their indignation at Ethan's behavior, while others simply waited in silence, hoping that Sister Grace would manage to overcome that difficult moment with dignity. The orphanage children, who were sitting in the front rows, looked at their maternal figure with a mixture of concern and trust. Ethan remained standing, arms crossed and an arrogant smile on his face, clearly satisfied with the embarrassment he had created, and convinced that he had proven his point about the difference between professional artists and well-meaning amateurs. He awaited the moment when the nun would give up or deliver a mediocre performance that would validate all his malicious comments, without imagining that he was about to experience the biggest shock of his artistic career. The silence in the theater was so profound that even the distant city traffic seemed to have completely ceased. Sister Grace remained motionless for a few seconds that seemed eternal to everyone present, her eyes closed as if connecting with something much greater than that humiliating situation. When she finally opened her mouth to emit the first note, something extraordinary happened that no one in the theater was prepared to witness. The voice that emerged from her lips was not just technically perfect, it was something that transcended any conventional definition of musical talent. It was as if decades of life experience, silent suffering, unconditional love for abandoned children, sleepless nights caring for the sick, and whispered prayers in the early morning had crystallized into sound waves that directly touched the soul of every person present. It was not just a voice, it was the audible manifestation of an entire life dedicated to the service of others. The first song she chose was Ave Maria, but interpreted in a way that not even the greatest classical artists in the world could reproduce. Each note carried the weight of her personal experiences. Each breathing pause contained decades of accumulated wisdom, and each vocal modulation revealed a natural technique that had been preserved intact through the years, like a fine wine that only improves with age. Her interpretation did not follow traditional academic rules, but possessed an emotional authenticity that no music school could teach. The impact was instantaneous and devastating. The first people in the audience began to cry even before she completed the first verse, touched by an emotion they could not rationally explain. It was as if her voice had the power to awaken deeply buried memories, to heal old wounds they didn't even know were still bleeding, and to connect each listener with purer and higher aspects of their own humanity. Ethan, who had remained standing with his arms crossed and an expression of superiority on his face, felt his legs weaken when the first notes reached his ears. The arrogant smile that adorned his face began to gradually disappear, replaced by an expression of growing disbelief. His arms slowly uncrossed and fell to his sides, while his mouth opened slightly in absolute shock. Ethan's physical transformation was visible to everyone who observed him. His previously erect and dominant posture began to involuntarily stoop, as if the weight of the revelation he was witnessing was literally unbearable for his shoulders. His hands, which moments before had gesticulated with arrogance while humiliating the nun, now trembled uncontrollably by his side, and his legs seemed to have lost the ability to support him properly. What was most impressive was not just the exceptional technical quality of Sister Grace's voice, but the way she managed to convey emotions that seemed to come from an infinite reservoir of human experiences. Each musical phrase told a story of sacrifice, unconditional love, forgiveness, and hope, kept alive even in the most difficult moments. It was a masterclass not only in vocal technique, but in how true art is born from true life, from real pain transformed into beauty. The music producers who were present at the event, initially attracted only by Ethan's presence, began to lean forward in their seats, immediately recognizing that they were witnessing something rarely seen even in the greatest theaters in the world. Some of them discreetly took out their phones to record that historic moment, instinctively knowing that they would never hear anything similar again in their professional lives. The entire audience had been transported to a state of collective spiritual elevation, united by an experience that transcended differences in social class, age, religion, or education. At that moment, everyone was simply a human being, touched by the purest manifestation of what musical art could represent when it is born from a truly generous and experienced heart. As Sister Grace continued her performance, the theater transformed into a sacred space where time seemed to have completely stopped. Her voice gained strength and confidence with each note, as if decades of musical silence were being broken simultaneously, releasing an artistic energy that had remained compressed in her heart for too long. The song flowed through her like a river, finally finding its way to the ocean, natural and inevitable. The tears that began as isolated drops on the faces of some spectators turned into a collective emotion that took over the entire room. Mature men who rarely showed their feelings publicly found themselves openly weeping, without any embarrassment or attempt to hide their reactions. Women who had faced their own silent struggles throughout life recognized in the nun's voice echoes of their own journeys of overcoming and sacrifice. The orphanage children, who knew Sister Grace only as the maternal figure who cared for their daily needs, discovered a new dimension of their protector that they would never have imagined existed. Their little eyes shone with renewed admiration, mixed with pride in being part of the life of someone so special. Some of the older children whispered comments of astonishment among themselves, unable to believe that the same person who helped them with homework and healed their small injuries possessed such an extraordinary talent. The other artists waiting their turn to perform remained paralyzed backstage, some with tears streaming down their faces, others simply shaking their heads in reverence at what they were witnessing. The guitar quartet that was to perform next whispered among themselves that it would be impossible to go on stage after that performance, not due to technical inadequacy, but out of respect for the transcendental moment that was unfolding. Ethan had involuntarily sat back in his seat, his body seemingly unable to remain upright before the magnitude of what he was hearing. His hands partially covered his face in an instinctive attempt to hide the emotional transformation taking place within him. The man who minutes earlier ridiculed the idea of an elderly nun singing now found himself completely disarmed before a lesson in humility he had never expected to receive. Sister Grace's vocal technique revealed decades of musical knowledge that had remained intact despite time and lack of formal practice. Her transitions between registers were as smooth as silk. Her controlled breathing demonstrated a mastery that only years of serious training could provide, and her interpretation carried an emotional maturity that no music conservatory could teach. It was the difference between academic knowledge and life wisdom transformed into art. The local journalists who had attended the event, primarily to cover Ethan's presence, now focused their attention completely on the nun, recognizing that they were witnessing a much bigger story than any celebrity appearance. Some of them were already mentally planning the headlines they would write the next day, knowing that this story would touch the hearts of thousands of people who would read about the event. The atmosphere in the theater had become almost mystical, as if everyone present were participating in a collective spiritual ritual where music served as a bridge between the material world and something infinitely greater. Sister Grace's voice seemed to carry with it all the prayers she had made over the years, all the tears she had wiped from the children's faces, and all the faith she had kept alive even in the most difficult moments of her journey. When she finally reached the climax of the song, her voice hit notes that seemed impossible for someone her age, demonstrating that true talent does not obey the conventional limitations of time or circumstances. The entire theater vibrated with the emotional intensity of that moment, creating an experience that none of those present would ever forget for the rest of their lives. The moment Sister Grace completed her performance was followed by an even deeper silence than the one that had preceded her first note. It was as if the entire theater had collectively stopped breathing, trying to process the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. No one dared to break that sacred moment with premature applause, for everyone instinctively felt that any sound would be a profanation of the transcendental experience they had lived. Ethan remained completely motionless in his seat, his face transformed into a mask of shock and disbelief. The man who had spent decades building a career based on vocal technique and sophisticated musical production had just discovered that there was a dimension of art he had never even imagined. His hands trembled visibly as he tried to assimilate the fact that he had publicly humiliated someone whose talent surpassed his own in an almost inconceivable way. The first tears began to stream down the famous singer's face, initially just 1 or 2 drops that he quickly tried to hide, but soon turned into a silent cry that he could no longer control. It was as if all his certainties about his own artistic superiority were simultaneously crumbling, replaced by the painful understanding that he had spent years confusing commercial success with true talent. Slowly, as if it were a choreographed movement, Ethan began to rise from his seat. His legs trembled so much that he had to lean on the back of the chair to stand properly. Each step towards the stage seemed to cost him immense effort, not because of the physical distance, but because of the emotional weight of publicly acknowledging the grotesque mistake he had made minutes earlier. When he finally reached the foot of the stage, Ethan looked up, meeting Sister Grace's serene eyes, which observed him without any trace of resentment or triumph. It was a look of pure compassion, the same maternal look she directed at the orphanage children when they made a mistake and needed guidance. At that moment, Ethan understood that he was before someone who not only possessed extraordinary musical talent, but also a greatness of spirit he had never encountered before. With his voice choked with emotion, Ethan asked permission to go onto the stage. When Sister Grace extended her hand to help him, he held it with a reverence that contrasted sharply with the arrogance he had shown earlier. Here was a man completely transformed, humbled in the best sense of the word, reduced to his most basic human essences before a lesson he would never forget. Before the entire audience, Ethan knelt on the stage and asked Sister Grace for forgiveness for his disrespectful and cruel attitude. His words came out broken by tears, but they carried a sincerity that deeply touched everyone present. He said that he had spent years believing he knew music, but that night he had discovered he knew nothing about the true power of art when it comes from a pure and experienced heart. Sister Grace's response was simple and powerful in its humility. She helped Ethan to stand, held his hands with maternal affection, and said that everyone makes mistakes when they allow pride to cloud their vision. But what matters is the ability to recognize those mistakes and learn from them. Her words carried no tone of superiority or revenge, only the wisdom of someone who had learned over decades that forgiveness is always the highest path. At that moment, the entire audience finally erupted in applause that lasted several minutes, not only for the extraordinary performance they had witnessed, but for the lesson in humanity and humility they had just experienced. It was applause that celebrated not only musical talent, but the human capacity for transformation and redemption. The commotion caused by Sister Grace's performance spread far beyond the limits of the orphanage theater that night. 3 renowned music producers who were present at the event approached the stage, still with tears in their eyes, carrying business cards and proposals that could completely transform the nun's life. Marcus Davies, owner of one of the country's largest record labels, was the first to speak up, offering a $1 million contract that included album production, a national tour, and even performances in international theaters. Marcus's proposal was so generous, it felt surreal for the context of that modest orphanage. He spoke of a fee of $200,000 per performance, sales royalties that could yield millions over the years, and a support structure that would include the best musicians, producers, and arrangers in the country. His excitement was genuine, as he recognized that he was before a talent that appears once in a generation, a voice that could move crowds and leave a lasting legacy in the history of American music. 2 other producers joined the conversation, each trying to outdo the previous offer. Helen Green, specializing in classical and international music, suggested that Sister Grace could be introduced to the greatest opera houses in the world, where her voice would be valued by audiences who truly understood the magnitude of her talent. She mentioned possibilities of recordings with European symphony orchestras and performances in venues that would receive her art with the reverence it deserved. The 3rd producer, specializing in crossover between popular and classical music, presented an even more ambitious vision. He imagined a project that combined Sister Grace's religious experience with contemporary arrangements, creating a unique style that could touch both the devout and music lovers in general. His proposal included collaborations with big names in American and international music, creating an artistic fusion that would be revolutionary in the global music scene. The offers were so tempting that even some of the other nuns who had attended the event began to whisper among themselves about the incredible possibilities opening up for their companion. They imagined how those resources could transform not only Sister Grace's life, but also significantly contribute to the congregation's social works. With the amounts mentioned by the producers, it would be possible to completely renovate the orphanage, build new wings, and drastically expand services for needy children. Ethan, who had remained near the group throughout the conversation, silently observed the magnitude of the opportunities being offered to the nun. He knew all those producers personally and knew that their proposals were absolutely serious and achievable. In his mind, he calculated that Sister Grace was being offered a career that could be more financially successful than his own, and this did not cause him envy, but rather an even greater admiration for the extraordinary person she had revealed herself to be. The crowd of people that formed around the stage included not only the producers, but also journalists who quickly understood that they had a story that could become national news. Some local television stations had already been contacted, and cameramen rushed to get to the scene before the moment dispersed. The story of the nun who moved an entire theater and humbled a famous singer with her humility and talent had all the ingredients to go viral on social media. Amidst all these tempting offers and media frenzy, Sister Grace remained serene and attentive, respectfully listening to each proposal, but maintaining an expression that did not reveal her intentions. Her hands remained clasped in her characteristic prayer posture, and her eyes occasionally turned to the orphanage children who still watched her with growing admiration, as if trying to fully understand who this person who cared for them every day truly was. After patiently listening to all the million-dollar proposals and observing the genuine excitement of the music producers, Sister Grace asked for a few minutes of silence to reflect. She walked slowly to the edge of the stage, where she could clearly see the faces of the 45 orphanage children who watched her with a mixture of expectation and concern. Those children represented much more than a professional responsibility to her. They were her true family, her reason for being, and the source of all the joy she had experienced in recent decades. When she finally turned to the producers, Sister Grace had a serene determination in her eyes that everyone immediately recognized. With a soft but firm voice, she deeply thanked them for all the generous offers, explaining that she felt honored by the trust they placed in her talent. However, she said that her life had been built on conscious choices to serve others, and that she could not abandon the children who depended on her to seek personal recognition or financial rewards. She explained that during her youth, she had already faced a similar decision when she had to choose between a promising musical career and caring for her ailing mother. The experience had taught her that some things in life are more valuable than any amount of money or fame they can offer. Her religious vocation and her work at the orphanage were not just professions for her, but a life mission that gave meaning to every day of her existence. Marcus Davies, the first producer who had made the offer, tried to argue that she could use her fame and financial resources to help many more children than just the 45 in the orphanage. He suggested that a successful musical career could generate enough funds to build dozens of orphanages and help thousands of vulnerable children. His argument was logically sound and demonstrated a genuine understanding of the transformative potential that Sister Grace's talent could have on a national scale. For a moment, the nun seemed to seriously consider the proposal, recognizing the validity of the arguments presented. She admitted that the idea of being able to help a much larger number of children was tempting, and that perhaps there was a way to reconcile her religious vocation with a musical career directed towards charitable purposes. Her words made the producers regain hope that she might accept some form of compromise that would benefit everyone. It was then that Helen Green, the producer specializing in classical music, presented a different proposal that immediately captured Sister Grace's attention. Instead of a career as a singer, she suggested that the nun consider becoming a singing teacher at a music school for talented low-income youth. This position would allow her to use her experience and knowledge to train a new generation of artists, while remaining true to her values of serving the less privileged. Helen's proposal was perfect in its simplicity and suitability for Sister Grace's values. As a teacher, she could share not only her exceptional vocal technique, but also the life lessons she had learned over decades of dedication to others. It would be a way to multiply her talent through other young people who, like she had been in her youth, possessed extraordinary abilities but lacked the resources to develop them properly. Sister Grace's eyes lit up upon hearing this suggestion. She asked about the possibility of maintaining her residence at the orphanage and continuing to care for the children who were already part of her life, dedicating only a few hours a week to music instruction. Helen assured her that this flexibility would be completely possible, and that it would actually be preferable, as it would demonstrate to future students that true music is born from a life dedicated to service and love for others. For the first time since the offers began to be presented, Sister Grace smiled openly, recognizing that she had found a way to honor her musical talent without abandoning her primary life mission. Sister Grace's decision to accept Helen Green's proposal to become a singing teacher created a new wave of enthusiasm among everyone present in the theater. The music school that Helen directed had already produced several talents, who later excelled on the national scene, but it had never had a teacher who combined exceptional technique with such profound life wisdom as the nun. In the months that followed that transformative night, the Community School of Musical Talents underwent a silent revolution. Sister Grace developed a unique teaching methodology that went far beyond traditional vocal technique. She taught her students that true music is born from emotional authenticity, the ability to transform personal experiences into art, and the courage to show vulnerability before an audience. Her classes took place 3 times a week, always in the afternoon, allowing her to maintain her responsibilities at the orphanage during the mornings and evenings. The young people who enrolled in her classes came from diverse backgrounds, but all shared the same passion for music and the same need for technical and emotional guidance. Many of them had grown up in situations of social vulnerability similar to what Sister Grace had faced in her own youth. The nun's teaching method was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of focusing only on scales and technical exercises, she began each class by asking students to share something significant they had experienced since the last meeting. These personal experiences became the raw material she used to teach interpretation, showing how every human emotion could be transformed into authentic vocal expression. Sarah, a 19-year-old who had recently lost her father, discovered through Sister Grace's classes how to channel her pain into interpretations that deeply touched anyone who heard her sing. Chris, a 22-year-old who had grown up on the streets, learned to use his survival experience to give strength and authenticity to the songs he performed. Each student found their unique voice through the patient and wise guidance of their teacher. The school's reputation quickly spread throughout the music community. Producers who had previously paid no attention to the talents trained there began to attend the students' biannual performances, impressed by the technical quality and interpretive maturity they demonstrated. Some of the young people began to receive offers for music contracts, but always with Sister Grace's accompaniment and guidance, who ensured they made conscious decisions about their careers. Ethan Blackwood became a frequent visitor to the school, not as a celebrity doing charity, but as someone genuinely interested in learning about the nun's teaching approach. He had requested some private lessons with her, recognizing that despite all his professional experience, there were still fundamental aspects of music he needed to understand better. These sessions became moments of personal growth for the singer, who learned to connect his vocal techniques with an emotional authenticity he had lost over the years. The orphanage also indirectly benefited from Sister Grace's new role. Helen Green organized various benefit events where the school students performed to raise funds for the necessary renovations. In 2 years, they managed not only to completely renovate the roof, but also to build a new library and expand the children's recreational area. Sister Grace's story became a local legend that spread far beyond the city limits. Documentarians contacted the school interested in documenting her teaching method, and music educators from other regions began to visit her classes to learn from her approach. However, she remained the same humble person as always, focused on her students and the orphanage children, using her extraordinary voice to serve and transform lives instead of seeking personal recognition. 5 years after that memorable night at the orphanage theater, Sister Grace turned 72, surrounded by a much larger family than she had ever imagined possible. The music school had become a national reference center, and her former students were already beginning to excel on various stages across the country, always carrying with them the teachings of humility and authenticity they had learned from their exceptional teacher. The orphanage prospered as never before, not only from the resources raised through the musical events, but mainly from the example of dedication and unconditional love that Sister Grace continued to demonstrate daily. The children who grew up there under her care became responsible and compassionate young adults, many of them choosing professions focused on social service, inspired by the life of their maternal figure. Ethan Blackwood had completely transformed. His musical career gained an emotional depth he had never experienced before, and he became known not only for his voice, but also for his humility and his social projects aimed at vulnerable young musicians. The lesson in humility he received that night changed not only his art, but his entire perspective on what it means to be truly successful in life. Sister Grace's voice continued to echo through the school corridors every afternoon, teaching a new generation that true talent flourishes when cultivated with love, dedication, and purpose. Her story became a living testament that it is never too late to use our gifts in service of others, and that true personal fulfillment comes not from fame or money, but from the ability to touch and transform lives through what we do best. Thus, the nun who one day chose love over career discovered that by serving others, she had found the most important stage of all, the hearts of the people who had the privilege of knowing her and learning from her example of a life dedicated to others.